Hey there, welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 220. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is my latest G.I. Joe Classified figures. Now, G.I. Joe Classified is Hasbro's line of 6-inch G.I. Joes, and they've been making these figures for, I think, the past 3 years. And they've been releasing them pretty steadily. Like when I was a kid in the 80s and I first got into G.I. Joe, the G.I. Joes came out in waves of like a year. So, you'd get like 10 to 12 figures, maybe 15 figures, and they'd say, this is the 1982 lineup, this is the 1983 lineup, 84 lineup, and you kind of collected them over the course of the entire year. The back of the packaging shows you all the different figures that were available. So, you asked for your favorites for Christmas and for birthdays. And then you'd pick up the other ones as you could. And, between me and my brother Doug, we had a pretty complete collection. And there was something to be said for collecting like that. But nowadays, Hasbro reveals a couple of figures at a time. And they say, these are the next 3 figures that we're going to release. And you have no idea what's coming 2 or 3 months down the road, and they say here's another 3 figures and another 3 figures. So it's not like those annual waves where you kind of knew all year long what to expect. There's all kinds of twists and turns when it comes to collecting G.I. Joe Classified figures. And I've gotten pretty much all of them thus far. There's a couple holes in my collection, 1 or 2 I've chosen to skip because they're just repaints of figures I already have. And then there's maybe 1 or 2 figures that I'm still trying to track down. But anyway, so far this year, like right now, it is November 2022. And, so the year is winding down. I think I have done 1 video so far this year. I did it back in August. And it was titled G.I. Joe Classified Figures Thus Far in 2022 or something along those lines. And which I reviewed pretty much all the G.I. Joe figures that were released in the first half of the year. And I've been intending to do a video of all the G.I. Joes that have come out since then, but I've been kind of waiting for, them to wrap up, essentially, because I didn't want to do, these are the rest of the G.I. Joes of 2022, and then have 1 or 2 more figures trickle out after that. So, considering we're about a month and a half away from the end of the year, there could still be some more G.I. Joes coming. I don't think there are. I think the figures that I have here in front of me are the last of 2022. So I feel pretty confident saying this is the kind of companion video to the one I shot in August. So yeah, hopefully between those 2 videos, you'll have a pretty good idea of all the G.I. Joe Classified figures released this year. So that's what we're going to talk about. I do want to mention that it is Saturday night. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning. I have been drinking whiskey for a couple of hours. And I've been meaning to get to this video for a couple of days. And I could probably just shoot it tomorrow afternoon. But I'm not tired yet, and my wife went to sleep, so I'm like, well, I'll come down and do it now. Now I'm not like hammered or anything. I think I've done 2 videos where I was kind of hammered. This one is just I've got a nice little buzz going, so I don't think that will interfere with the review. But in case that it does, I just want to give you guys the heads up that I have been drinking for a few hours. And it's pretty good whiskey. I think this was a bottle that was gifted to me by my buddy Miguel. Probably, if I had to guess, probably close to a year ago. He probably gave it to me for my birthday, which is in January. I don't know why I slept on it for so long, but anyway, usually if I buy whiskey myself, I buy kind of the cheap stuff. In Canada, like Canadian Club is one of the kind of the go-to kind of cheapest brands. But this is a nicer one. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's nice. It's smooth. I'm enjoying it. Anyway, G.I. Joes. I've got a bunch to talk about, so I'm going to try not to ramble too much. The way I would normally do these videos is I would shoot an introduction for you, and then I would shoot a little ending where you've got me talking to the camera, but then the whole middle of the video would be close-ups of the figures. I turn the camera around and you just see the figures with my hands kind of getting in there in the mix. But that seems like too much work at the moment. I don't really feel like changing things up and getting behind the camera and doing detailed reviews tonight, because I usually try and compare new figures to like past releases and all that sort of stuff. But I don't want to do that. Maybe tomorrow I'll shoot some split screen footage where I can match up what I'm talking about now, and then I can show you some comparisons and all that stuff. But for now, I think I'm just going to do a straight shot, just talking to you directly, talking to the camera, and I'll show you all this stuff. And yeah, so I think that's the way we're going to do it. So yeah, where do I want to start? So one thing that's kind of, I guess, to note, you know that I open all my toys if you watch my videos regularly. I don't typically hold on to packaging. Sometimes I'll keep blister cards and stuff like this and I'll hang them up. But when things come in boxes, I usually don't keep them. Even though sometimes there's some really nice artwork on there and stuff, I just don't have the room. And with G.I. Joe classified figures, they all have some really nice artwork on the sides of the boxes. But mostly it's just a window box on the front where you can see the action figure. And once the action figure comes out, the box, at least the front of the box is pretty boring. So I don't feel the need to keep it. And the back of the boxes, it's not like the vintage cards. Like if you flipped any of these around, you'd see they have individual file cards that talk about the individual characters, what their names are, their military specialty. You don't get any of that on the G.I. Joe classified boxes. So other than some kind of unique artwork down the bind, there's no real reason to keep it. However, Hasbro has recently made the move to plastic-free packaging in all of their toy lines. Transformers, Star Wars, G.I. Joe. And some people I know really don't like it. I don't really care that much one way or the other. Like, sure, there's problems where you can't really see the quality of the figure you're buying. Some people like to examine all the different Spider-Mans on the shelf to make sure they're getting the one with the best paint applications and all that stuff. I haven't really had any bad experiences with getting bad paint applications, so that's not really a big deal. I know sometimes people will return stuff at retail with the wrong figure inside, like they figure swap, and people are worried that that's going to happen to them nowadays because they can't see what's in the packaging. Again, I don't know how widespread that problem really is. So it does make it a little harder for me to throw out the packaging now, because as much as some people dislike the new packaging because there's no window on the front, because that was always like a plastic window to show you the figure, now they do fully sealed packaging. And I've got some examples of it here, which I'm going to show you, but then I'm going to throw it out afterwards. So I just kind of wanted to showcase it. So like, for example, this here is the Blue Ninjas set. So it's a 2-figure set. So you get a male and a female Blue Ninja on there. You see a little picture of the figures there in the corner. There's some more detailed shots of the figures on the back. It shows you all the different weapons they come with. You get some artwork on the side. So, with the old G.I. Joe packaging, pretty much all you got was the unique artwork on that little strip there, but then the front was all just a big window. But now you've got that really nice big piece of art. And yeah, it makes it kind of difficult to just throw this in the garbage because it's really nice artwork. But unfortunately, I don't have the room to keep this. So there's that. This is what the individual figures look like. So a standard figure, like that was a 2-figure pack. This is a single figure pack. So this here is Kamakura. So you can see the different artwork styles. So this one here is a lot more cartoony. But you get a nice big image there of the character. He's beating up a bunch of Cobra soldiers. Image of the figure on the back. Some more unique artwork on the side. And then a picture of the figure and all the accessories on the back as well. So pretty cool. This is Sergeant Slaughter. So again, I really like this packaging. You get images of, like, from the old comic book, from the old cartoon. Very cool. I like that picture on the side of his just like snarling face. And then a picture on the back of all the accessories and whatnot. Here's another multi-pack I got. This is the Viper Officer and Vipers 3-pack. So you get that nice artwork with multiple Vipers on the front. Not really any artwork on the side on this one. And then on the back, you get a nice action shot of all the action figures. And then the last one here I'll show you is really cool. This is the Serpentor box set. So this is the figure, which you can see displayed right here. So I've already opened this, obviously. This was kind of a surprise. I didn't expect to get this figure this year. There was a figure I had, the Sergeant Slaughter, actually. I had this guy pre-ordered at Big Bad Toy Store, and I was waiting for him to arrive, because once he showed up in my mail, I figured, okay, this is the last G.I. Joe that I'm going to get of 2022, and I can do my kind of year-end wrap-up of G.I. Joe Classified. And he arrived in the mail, I think, on Thursday, but then on Friday, I got a call from my local GameStop telling me that this figure had come in and that I could pick it up. And I was like, oh, geez, I didn't think that was coming in this soon. So once I got him, now I really do think this is the end of 2023. But who knows? Zorana, Dusty, those figures could show up before the end of the year. You never know. But anyway, this, you can see this is a really unique box. So a really cool picture of Serpentor on the front. Not much to see on the side. But on the back, you've got some really cool images of Serpentor sitting on his throne. This is a really cool shot of like Serpentor from the comic books. Yeah, really cool. Now this sleeve just slides off like so, and then the packaging opens up like that, and that's where the figure was, and that's where all of his various accessories was. I really intended to shoot some footage of this box, like with the figure in there, before I opened it up. But I forgot to. So, anyway. Alright, so I don't know if I should talk about these in any particular order. But since he's right here, maybe I'll talk about Serpentor. So Serpentor is the Cobra Emperor. He originally came out in, I want to say, 1986, something like that. So the G.I. Joe brand had been around for 4 or 5 years at that point in time. And, Cobra Commander is the leader of Cobra, which is the enemy of G.I. Joe. When most people think of Cobra, they think of Cobra Commander, obviously. But he was always kind of portrayed as a bit of a buffoon in the cartoons. And not so much so in the comic books, but he still had failed at defeating G.I. Joe quite a few times. And I'm not entirely sure the timeline of how this all worked, but I think maybe Hasbro just wanted to create a new leader, to sell more toys, and so they went to Marvel Comics and said, "We need you to integrate this character into your storyline." And anyway, the storyline was pretty similar in both the comic and the cartoon. Sometimes the comic and the cartoon strayed, quite a bit, with the comic traditionally being more realistic than the cartoon. But anyway, the gist of it was the mad scientist that worked for Cobra, Dr. Mindbender, he thought, Cobra Commander is an idiot, so I'm going to make a supreme Cobra leader by gathering the DNA of the best rulers from history. So he went and he robbed the tombs of Alexander the Great and Attila the Hun and all kinds of crazy historical figures like that. And he took that DNA and he built Serpentor. So Serpentor is kind of like grown in a lab to be the ultimate Cobra leader. And to some people that was probably pretty far-fetched. Like if you're a little bit older than me and you got into G.I. Joe in 1982 because of the realistic military aspects, by 1986 you were probably like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. But for me, I was still a kid and I loved it. I thought the idea of Serpentor was great. He didn't actually replace Cobra Commander. All he did was add some inner turmoil amongst Cobra, because Cobra Commander was trying to, retain his role as leader of Cobra, but he had to deal with this Serpentor guy. And Serpentor was just a really cool character. I liked him in the comic books. I liked him in the cartoon. And I liked the action figure. My brother Doug had the vintage action figure when we were kids. I honestly don't know if I have it in my collection now. Because when I was a kid, me and my brother Doug, we collected everything kind of 50-50. So he had half the toys, I had the other half. And Serpentor was one of his, but in the years since, like as a grown-up, I have filled in a lot of the holes of my vintage G.I. Joe collection. And I honestly don't know if I have the vintage Serpentor. I might. But anyway, the vintage Serpentor was very cool. He had this kind of metallic gold armor. But I didn't have that as a kid. I didn't own a Serpentor until kind of the early 2000s when G.I. Joe came back in what we call the new sculpt era. So I have a Serpentor from those days. And then they released a couple of versions of Serpentor in the modern era, which started in 2007 to about 2019 or so. But anyway, this new version of Serpentor blows away any prior versions. This guy is awesome. And I think this guy is definitely a contender for my best action figure of the year. And that's saying a lot. I've got a lot of cool action figures. This guy is fantastic. Now, mind you, he was kind of expensive. Canadian, he was $116. Most G.I. Joe figures in Canada, they're probably nowadays with the price hikes and stuff, they range from $35 to even as high as like $42, $43 at retail, which is very high. They used to be $30 for a long time. They've gone up quite a bit. Serpentor, $116. Now, is he worth it? I don't know, but he does come with this cool chariot. Now, this is a pretty, a good sized vehicle when you look at it. There's a lot of detail on there. You kind of had to snap it together when you first got it. The Cobra head had to go on separately, and then the kind of handlebars here, and then these extra guns, and then these extra fins here on the back. But anyway, it's all very cool. Very detailed. The little Cobra mouth opens and closes and stuff, and I dig it. But if I had the option to say get the $116 set or to just buy the single figure for $30 or $40, I probably would have just bought the figure because I just don't have enough room in my room to display a whole lot of vehicles. I try to avoid them when I can. But at the same time, I'm not mad that Hasbro made me buy the chariot because Serpentor's chariot is such an integral part of him. The vintage figure came with the chariot. Most versions of him have come with a chariot. He was often seen flying this chariot around. So it really is kind of part of his character, and it is a really cool accessory. And it's not so big that it, I know $116 is a lot, but if this had been a tank or a Jeep at the 6-inch scale, he probably would have been a $200 figure or more. So, yeah, I thought it was a reasonable price. I didn't really mind. Anyway, the figure itself is awesome. I love the paint job on this guy. He's got this cool soft goods cape with the Cobra kind of scales all over it. You can see here he's got a sword. He's got the Cobra staff. He's got these kind of Wolverine type claws that you can snap onto his wrist if you want to. Those are optional. He also has a swappable hood. So this one here, this kind of looks more like what I would call his modern look that he had in Devil's Due comic books, which is probably a little bit more, I don't know if realistic is the right word for this guy, but it's just not as grandiose as the vintage figure had this big extra Cobra hood that kind of came around the back of him. Anyway, he does have an optional, you can split this up so the hood is separate piece from the Cobra head on top. Anyway, I have them over there. Maybe I'll do an insert shot where you can see what it looks like. Maybe I won't. I don't know. But I'm really pleased with this guy. He looks incredible. He's got a lot of accessories. Like I mentioned, the extra hood, the extra blades on the hand. And he also came with his little Cobra buddy here, which is really cool. It's a big sculpted Cobra, and it's painted much bigger than the little gold Cobras we get with the vintage toy line. Very cool. Another accessory he has over there is a green snake that's just a big solid snake, because in the G.I. Joe animated movie, you can see Serpentor has these snakes wrapped around his neck here. So there's these two like snake heads kind of sitting on his shoulders. In the movie, apparently those were live snakes. And he takes one of his slithering snakes off his shoulder and he just straightens it out like this, like a spear, and he throws it into Duke's heart. And anyway, they gave us a really straight snake spear, which is pretty cool. So Serpentor is great. I love him. Very, very cool. You know, I don't know. Potential toy of the year is what I'm trying to say. He's I don't know if he's going to get the top spot, but I don't see how he doesn't make my top 10 list. Incredible figure. Next up, maybe we'll talk about Sergeant Slaughter. So this is my other like second to newest figure. And this guy is also really cool. I like this guy a lot. If you're familiar with Sergeant Slaughter, he is a real guy. He was a WWF, WWE wrestler when I was a kid. And from what I understand, he never actually served in the military, but that was just his character on wrestling. And back in the day, back in the 80s, Hasbro decided to integrate him because he pretends he's a soldier. Why don't we put him into the G.I. Joe brand as basically the G.I. Joe drill sergeant? And he was introduced during the G.I. Joe animated movie. And he made a big impression on a lot of people. I liked him as a G.I. Joe character. He was voiced by the real Sergeant Slaughter in the cartoon. And he's pretty great. Now, an interesting thing to note about Slaughter is his connection to the G.I. Joe brand has kind of come and gone over the years because, he's a real dude. So when Hasbro, I guess, licenses him to be a part of the G.I. Joe brand, it's usually for a limited period of time. And then once he's no longer under contract with Hasbro, they can't just keep making Sergeant Slaughter figures. They need to re-sign him to another contract. So there have been years where we haven't got any Sergeant Slaughter figures, and then they sign a new contract and we get a few. Anyway, it was just about a year ago when we found out that Valiverse, which is another toy company that makes 6-inch military figures, they make the Action Force figures, and Valiverse is owned by Bobby Valla, which is a guy that used to work for Hasbro, but he got fired, and he kind of, he's passionate about this stuff. I don't want to say he did it out of spite per se, but he was trying to get a 6-inch line of G.I. Joes started at Hasbro. They didn't pursue it, and he got canned. And then he said, well, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. So he started his own line of 6-inch military figures, very much in the vein of G.I. Joe. But after he kind of started his whole Action Force line, then Hasbro said, you know what, we are going to do a 6-inch line of G.I. Joes. And so now the two of them run concurrently. I collect both. I like them both. G.I. Joe I have more of a connection to because I know these characters from my childhood. But the Action Force figures are really cool. Anyway, so about a year ago, Bobby Valla had a surprise announcement, and he said, I've signed Sergeant Slaughter, so he's now a member of Action Force. And that seemed like a pretty big get. It was almost like he was sticking it to Hasbro, saying, I'm going to take the guy who's always been associated with G.I. Joe in the past, and I'm going to sign him over to my rival company. And they actually did 2 Sergeant Slaughter figures in the Action Force line. And I have both of them, and they are very nice figures. I was pretty pleased with them. It was the first time getting Sergeant Slaughter in the 6-inch scale, at least as far as the military aspect goes. Like, I think there have been some like wrestling figures of him in the 6-inch scale. Anyway, I really like the Action Force figure, and it was a big surprise when all of a sudden Hasbro announced that they were doing this figure, because it seemed like, well, are you with Action Force or not? How can you be licensed to both companies? I'm not going to pretend to know exactly how it works, but somehow he is. He has managed to sell his license to both, his likeness to both companies. Or maybe he did it to Action Force first for a period of 12 months, and then as soon as that ended, he went over to Hasbro. Whatever the deal is, I don't really care. I don't really mind. I'm just happy to get more Sergeant Slaughter figures. I don't know if this one's better or worse than the Action Force ones. I kind of like it better than the Action Force, I think. Both of them have a removable hat. They have removable glasses. They're pretty similar otherwise. I really like the look of the face and everything. If you don't get this figure, and you have the Action Force one, I think you could have it serve as a stand-in with your G.I. Joe figures, and that would work just fine. But, yeah, if you can track both down or all three down or whatever, then do it. I've gotten more Sergeant Slaughter figures in the past 12 months than I've gotten in the past 30 years because, again, when I was a kid, my brother Doug owned the Sergeant Slaughter G.I. Joe figure. And I'm trying to remember if we had a wrestling figure of him when we were kids. I don't think so, but if we did, Doug owned it. But now I have Sergeant Slaughter from Action Force. I also have Sergeant Slaughter from G.I. Joe. And they also recently released a Sergeant Slaughter from the WWE Masters of the Universe line. I don't really collect wrestling figures on their own, but I was collecting some of the mashup figures, which was WWF crossed over with Masters of the Universe. So I got a Sergeant Slaughter from that line as well. So yeah, I've got all kinds of Sergeant Slaughters. And I don't know if it's just newness bias, but I think this might be my favorite of the bunch. He's got a bunch of cool accessories, including extra hands. He even comes with a little action figure of himself. And that's kind of a nod to the fact that back in the 80s, when the first G.I. Joe figure came out, the actual Sergeant Slaughter would do commercials where he'd hold up his action figure and be like, buy my action figure. And so now you can actually have him with his little action figure in his hand, which is pretty cool. So anyway, yeah, that's Sergeant Slaughter. Pretty cool stuff. What else? Let's see. Why don't we talk about that Ninja 2-pack? So, like I said, it came with a male and a female Blue Ninja. Now, the Blue Ninjas, they are not historically part of G.I. Joe lore, I guess. And I'll keep in mind, I'm speaking off the top of my head, and I'm a little drunk, so don't shoot me down too hard in the comments if I've got something wrong here. But in the comic books and stuff of the 80s, there was the Red Ninjas, which was the clan, the Arashikage clan, that Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are connected with. However, there was a G.I. Joe figure in the vintage line called the Ninja Viper, and he was a blue ninja. Just in color, but yeah, he was called Ninja Viper. It wasn't until more recent years, like when IDW got the G.I. Joe license to do G.I. Joe comic books, that they introduced the concept of the blue ninjas. But they were like cyborgs. They were like robot ninjas. And they didn't look anything like these action figures I'm about to show you. So I don't really know what Hasbro's thinking with these figures. Are these supposed to be like the Ninja Viper of old? Or are they supposed to be those cyborg blue ninjas from the comic books? Or are they just kind of their own unique thing? Based on the look of them, I think they're kind of just supposed to be their own unique thing, not really tied to either the Ninja Viper or the Blue Ninjas from the comic book. Regardless, I'm fine with them being here. I think they're cool. This figure here is just a direct repaint of the Red Ninja figure that we got in the first wave of G.I. Joe Classified. And even that Red Ninja figure was pretty weird because he had a unique design, which was nothing like we'd ever seen on a Red Ninja before. So they've repainted that, giving us the Blue Ninja. But one thing they've done, which is really cool, is you notice this head with that like devil mask on there. You probably can't see it very well right now, but I'll do a side-by-side insert shot and you'll get a better look at him. So anyway, he has the option to display him with the standard head, which is just a repaint of the Red Ninja head, or you can give him this devil mask. And for me, I love this devil mask. I'm going to, this is how I'm going to display him on my shelf. But if you wanted to buy this set twice to, say, build a Blue Ninja army, you could display him both ways, which is a really cool option. He came with a bunch of accessories. You see, I've got him displayed with a little axe in his hand, and he's got some swords on his back, but he came with a bunch of other shit, too. Very cool. And then the female Ninja Viper, and there's really no precedent for her, because I don't think there was any female Blue Ninjas in the comic books or the vintage line. But, again, very cool concept. Why not add her in here? She looks great. Now, you see here, I've got her displayed with her more, I guess what we'd call standard ninja face. But she also has an alternate head with a mask on it that's got like a fox head. I prefer this ninja face on her, so I'm not really going to display her with the fox head. but it's cool, again, to have the option if you bought 2 of these packs. I think from the neck down, this figure is mostly the Akiko figure from the Snake Eyes movie toy line. But anyway, it works. Again, she's loaded up with accessories. She's got all kinds of stuff with her. I really hope that they make a Jinx figure, which is one of the G.I. Joe female ninjas. She was one of my favorite characters when I was a kid. She remains one of my favorite characters. And if they repainted this exact figure in red and called her Jinx, I'd be fine with that. It's a really nice figure. But I do hope they kind of maybe take the body and maybe give her a new head to give us a new Jinx. Just because Jinx is a cool enough character that I think she warrants her own unique head. But anyway, that figure is good enough. And I think it shows promise that we are going to get a Jinx at some point, because they have so many pieces that they can reuse to make her. Alright, what else? So yeah, that Viper 3-pack I had. So let's talk about this a little bit. So this set was kind of expensive, which was kind of a bummer, because I already have a Cobra Viper. The standard Cobra Viper in the blue and red, they released him like a year ago, so I already have that guy. So now this set here was 2 more red and blue Cobra Vipers, and then 1 more Viper who's supposed to be a Cobra Viper officer, and he's painted in the gray and maroon colors. So you're getting 3 figures, which are pretty much the same. 2 of them really are identical to a figure that I already have in my collection. So the fact that they were charging so much for this set, like I think online it's like $90 American, which for me as a Canadian, that's about 120, Canadian or so, which kind of sucks because, like I said, these figures individually were about $35, and you're thinking, okay, well, 2 of them are identical. One of them is just a repaint of those 2 figures. They're figures I already have. You're forcing me to buy 3 of them. Shouldn't I get a discount? You shouldn't be charging me full retail plus to get 3 figures. So that's kind of a bummer. However, I did score a really good deal on that. I think the retailer I bought this from had it priced wrong, because I bought it for $60 Canadian. So that's kind of a steal. And yeah, it's a really cool set. So here is the officer figure in his gray and maroon color scheme. Otherwise, he's the exact same figure as the previously released Cobra Viper, except he looks really good in these colors. I'm not sure when this color scheme was first introduced. I do have one in these colors from the modern era. I think he was part of the 50th anniversary line, which probably came out around 2017 or so. So there is precedent for this color scheme. I'm not sure if there had been a previous one in these colors. I'll find out and I'll post it in there if there was. But anyway, he's really cool. But besides him, then we got 2 of the standard Vipers. So here we go. There's these 2 guys. So these are very similar to the previous Viper figure, which was an exclusive to Target as part of the Cobra Island collection. But it's not the same. The paint job on these guys is a little more subdued. It's like the colors are much more maybe real world, I guess, because the red on the other guy is much brighter. It pops a lot more. I don't know which one's better or worse. I tend to like the bright color just because he stands out a little bit more on the shelf. But anyway, they're all nice figures regardless. One thing that's kind of cool about these guys is Hasbro could have very easily given us 2 identical figures and said, look, you guys like army builders. You would have bought this guy multiple times anyway, so we're just going to stick 2 of them in the box, and there you go, army builders. But they went the extra mile, and they actually gave these 2 guys, which are essentially identical, 2 different skin tones. I don't know if you'll be able to see it here, but I'll do the insert. So this guy here, you see he's got like a Caucasian neck, and this guy here, he's got like an African American neck. Now they did come with like scarves to wear around their neck, and if you kept the scarves on them, you never really would have noticed that. But you take the scarves off, and you can see they've got different skin tones. Now, also, you'll notice this guy here, he's got these like wrist guards here, And with those things on, you can't even see his skin tone. And they're not really meant to come off, but I had to really fight to peel them off on this figure. And you can see there, he has got the dark skin, on his lower arms. And if I had pulled this guy's shin guards or his wrist guards off, he would have had, Caucasian skin under there. So that's really cool that they went the extra mile to give you the two different skin tones. I'm going to display them like this. So my original Viper from Cobra Island, I've got him over there with the scarf on, and he's got his wrist guards on. So you can't really see what kind of color skin he has. This guy here, I'm going to leave his scarf off with the wrist guard, so you can at least see that this is a white guy here. And then this guy here, I'm going to display him with the wrist guards off and the scarf off, so you can clearly see that he's African American. And it really kind of adds a little bit of variety amongst the figures, which I really like. Now, the Viper is a really cool figure. These guys came with a ton of accessories as well. I'll have to show you in an insert. Besides the extra guns, they came with a ton of blast accessories, like all these little bullet shots, these translucent orange plastic that you can put on the ends of their guns so it looks like they're firing their guns. There's explosions. There's I don't know how to describe them. There's a bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're really cool. You might have noticed with my officer, I have him displayed with a little smoke effect coming out of the bit of his gun, so it's as if he just fired his gun, and there's a little waft of smoke coming up from there. So there was a bunch of stuff like that in the box. So a bunch of guns and a bunch of blast effects. Very cool. Let me see, what else? While we're talking about the Viper, I might as well talk about, I mentioned Target exclusive figures earlier. They are kind of the bane of my existence. In Canada, we don't have Target. And yet, Hasbro insists on putting out these Target exclusive figures. So the first year or two of G.I. Joe Classified, they were called Cobra Island figures, and they had this kind of unique packaging, and they were only available at Target, and I had to jump through some hoops to get them, either have my brother who lives in the United States buy them for me, or to order them on eBay and pay extra costs and stuff. Anyway, so there's another set now, and this year they've moved away from Cobra Island, and they've moved towards a couple of sub-teams of G.I. Joe. So in the 80s, there was a sub-team of Cobra called Python Patrol, where they took existing figures and they repainted them in new color schemes, and they took existing G.I. Joes and painted them in tiger stripes and called them Tiger Force. So now, those are considered Target exclusive figures. They're taking existing figures, repainted them as Python Patrol and Tiger Force. You can only get them at Target. So, I was able to get, with the help of my brother Doug, he was in Toronto, and he found these figures for me at a Toys R Us. So even though they're Target exclusives, they do show up in Canada at Toys R Us in limited numbers. They're hard to find, but my brother found both the Viper and the Cobra B.A.T for me, which I'll talk about in a second. So here is the Python Patrol Viper. So just like the other three figures I just showed you, this is the exact same figure as far as the sculpt goes. So I now have the Cobra Viper. I have the single one from Cobra Island. I have the Python Patrol, and I have the 3-pack. So I've got 5 Vipers now in total. None of them are identical, but it's all the same sculpt, just with different paint jobs. I like the Python Patrol sub-team, the concept of it. This is probably my least favorite of the Vipers. I don't think that color scheme is, as cool looking as the blue and red or as the maroon and gray. He's got those that checker kind of pattern, which is supposed to be, I guess, kind of snake scales on him and stuff. Anyway, it's a fine figure. I think this is the first Viper that didn't come with the optional scarf. So you can see he's got white skin there on his neck, which is fine. But if I was to keep the scarf on my other 4 Vipers, it does seem a little weird that this guy doesn't even have the option to have the scarf. So, anyway, but again, it's a cool figure. One comment I'll make on this figure, which applies to all the other ones I just showed you, which is really kind of annoying, is the goggles. On the vintage, My tablet just timed out on me. If I go for 40 minutes or so, it freezes up and tells me I've met my duration or whatever. So anyway, that kind of cut me off mid-sentence. But what I was trying to say is, in the vintage toy line, the Viper, he had this full face plate on his helmet, but then he also had those goggles sitting on top of his helmet. Does that make sense? I don't know. I don't know why you would have goggles when you've already got a full face shield. I don't really know if it makes any sort of sense. But it was fine. And it was part of the sculpt. So, you couldn't slide the goggles down over his visor or do anything with them. They were just sculpted as part of the helmet. For whatever reason, in the modern era, starting in 2007, they started making the goggles a separate piece on the Vipers, and that trend continues into the 6-inch version. And I don't see why they've done it. Typically, anytime you can take a piece of a character, if there was sometimes with the vintage figures, there was holsters like this with a gun and a holster, but it wasn't a gun you could remove. It was kind of just part of the sculpt. Nowadays, you can take the gun out of the holster, and you can take the knife out of the sheath and all that stuff. I like that they've added those details. But the fact that the goggles are removable, and I just dropped them, which is exactly the problem. They serve no purpose. You can't slide them down over his mask or anything. I know you can't really see what I'm doing here, but they only kind of rest on the top of his head like so. And if you move him at all, the goggles just fall off because they don't lock into place at all. So every time these guys topple over, which they tend to do, they don't come with display bases. The goggles always go sliding across my desk. And now that I have 5 Vipers falling down all the time and goggles are sliding everywhere, it's a pain in the ass. I wish these goggles were just part of the sculpt. If there was a functional reason why you could remove them, say a pistol or a knife where you could put them in his hand and he could use them, or even if the goggles, if they could slide down over his face shield, even though that would probably look silly, at least I would understand it. But why are these things removable? And if you're going to make them removable, at least make them lock into place on the helmet. So that's just a frustration I have with all the Viper figures. They just fell off again here, by the way. So it'll be a miracle if I don't lose those. All right, what else? Oh yeah, so I mentioned, my brother Doug, he was in Toronto. He was going to see Iron Maiden about a month or so ago. And when he was in Toronto, he bought me the Python Patrol Viper, and he also bought me the Python Patrol B.A.T. So B.A.T stands for Battle Android Trooper. These are the robotic Cobra Troopers. I already have the standard color Cobra B.A.T in mostly black, and they have another version of the B.A.T coming out that they've already announced called the Crimson B.A.T, I think, where he's mostly red. But this Python Patrol B.A.T is gray, yellow, and kind of maroon colored. And I think he's cool. But he's not based on anything from the vintage toy line. In the 80s, there was a Python Patrol Viper, but there was never a Python Patrol B.A.T before. So, yeah, it's kind of an odd choice, but I'm all for it. I don't think they need to be a slave to the vintage line. Go ahead, make a Python Patrol Destro if you want, even though there was never one of those before. I'm all for it. And I think he looks good in these colors. I was happy to get this figure. He's got all the same accessories that the previous B.A.T had. So, he's got interchangeable hands. He's got, I think he had a battle-damaged head as well. Very cool. Now, with most of these figures, I intend to put in an insert shot so you can just see them in the packaging and whatnot. I don't have an insert shot for these Python Patrol figures just because my brother was traveling with a single suitcase, and for me to ask him to bring 2 fully carded boxed figures home for me would have taken up a lot of room in his suitcase. So he bought them for me, but he did open them up and just gave them to me loose. So I don't have, I wasn't able to shoot any footage of them in the box. But anyway. Alright, what else we got? Let's move on. Gung-Ho. So Gung-Ho was included in, I want to say, Wave 3 of G.I. Joe Classified. And the Gung-Ho we got in Wave 3, he was a good figure. He wasn't the gung-ho I would have made if I was making G.I. Joe Classified line. But in the early days of G.I. Joe Classified, like Wave 1, Wave 2, they were kind of like modeled after the vintage Joes, but they weren't, again, to use the word, they weren't a slave to the vintage line. They weren't like just taking the vintage figures and blowing them up to a bigger scale. They were kind of being like taking the essence of a character, but making them contemporary. They've kind of gotten away from that now, and now they basically are just making blown up versions of the vintage toys. So with Gung-Ho, the version they gave us in Wave 2 or 3, whatever it was, he was wearing all like dark green. He had a different style mustache. Like you could definitely tell it was Gung-Ho, but he looked different enough from the vintage Gung-Ho, which traditionally had worn kind of a turquoise outfit and everything. Anyway, we got a new version of Gung-Ho this year, and he came on the vintage card. So instead of a box, he came on like a blister card, kind of like this, with the explosion behind him and everything. I'll put an insert in here so you can see what I'm talking about. But anyway, this Gung-Ho is awesome. So I was really stoked to get this new vintage carded Gung-Ho. And I was quite surprised when I got him, because when I first saw pictures of him online, I was like, okay, they took the Gung-Ho that they gave us previously, they repainted him in the vintage colors. Cool. And honestly, if they had done that, I think I would have been pleased. I'm like, okay, he looks better in these classic colors. Now, and to be honest, I don't even know, does he look better, or does he just look more familiar? Like, this is kind of nostalgic, but really kind of a darker military green is probably more realistic for an army guy. But this is what I grew up with. This is what I like. But anyway, it's not just a repaint of that vintage figure. He's got a new head. He's got a new hat. I think he's got a new vest. He's got a different tattoo on his chest. He's got different accessories, like a different gun. It is pretty much a different figure entirely. He might have the same legs or something, but they could have just cheaped out and gave us a repaint, and they didn't. They improved the figure pretty much in every way. I like this guy a lot more. He's got the kind of more classic Gung-Ho mustache instead of the full handlebar. The other version of Gung-Ho had like a mohawk under his hat, which was a little odd, because the other Gung-Ho in the vintage line, the hat was sculpted to his head, so you didn't really know if he had hair under there, but you kind of just assumed he was bald. Anyway, this guy here is bald, which is how I think most people expect Gung-Ho to look, instead of the little Chuck Liddell mohawk that the other version had. So yeah, an improvement in every way. I really like this Gung-Ho. Very, very cool. Next up here, actually, maybe I'll move on to, so speaking of the Target exclusives, the Python Patrol and the Tiger Force, this is the first Tiger Force Joe we've got. This is Outback, which is the G.I. Joe survivalist or survival expert. I forget what they call him exactly. But this is an interesting figure in that when Outback first came out in the vintage line, he had a white t-shirt that said survival across the front. He had red hair. And that is the version that most people in North America know of when they think of Outback. Because even though he was repainted later to be added to the sub-team Tiger Force, he only got released in the Tiger Force version in the United Kingdom. So he never made it over to North America. And when they repainted him in Tiger Force, they changed his hair color to white. And they gave him this tigery t-shirt. And it was just kind of weird. Like, why did they paint his hair white? Like, it wasn't out of the ordinary necessarily for Hasbro to screw up somebody's hair color. Like, Duke's hair color changed from blonde to brown. Low Light had his hair color change. A couple other characters, Hawk. But to go white is pretty, like, bold choice. Like, did they actively determine, like, Outback is aged that much, or maybe he's seen some serious shit in the field and his hair went gray? It seemed like an odd choice, and I didn't ever know that there was a white-haired Outback until much later when I was a grown-up and, I had the internet and I found out about these European exclusive figures. Anyway, so the Tiger Force Outback is kind of a deep cut that only hardcore Joe fans know about. I do have a version of Tiger Force Outback from the modern line, which was a throwback to the UK exclusive. But what's weird in the classified line is that we're getting this version of Outback first. Like, you would have thought they would give us the red-haired white t-shirt version and then repaint it into this. But the fact that they gave us this guy first, and it has been announced that we are going to get the red-haired white t-shirt version, it just seems kind of weird that, they did it backwards. Because, nowadays, if I was a kid collecting G.I. Joe, this is how I would think of Outback, because this is the first version to come out. Which seems so crazy, because it's such a kind of niche version of Outback in most G.I. Joe fans' minds. Anyway, it's a really cool figure. I really like the sculpt of this guy. I like the tiger face t-shirt. It's a lot better than the vintage one. So, yeah, great stuff. What else? I'll talk about Stalker. So this guy here, this is a very cool figure. Stalker is one of the original 13 Joes from 1982, back when G.I. Joe was very realistic military. Everybody was just wearing kind of army green. There was no crazy neon colors or anything like that. And Stalker was one of my very first G.I. Joe figures. Because when G.I. Joe launched in 82, and I would have been 4 years old, my brother, Doug, who's 2 years older than me, so he was 6. And so he was already having birthday parties, and he had friends and stuff. And G.I. Joe was the most popular thing. So when he had a birthday, all of his friends bought him G.I. Joe figures. So out of those original 13 figures, my brother had 10 of them, and I had 3. I had Snake Eyes, Short Fuse, and Stalker. One thing that was nice about that is so many of the original G.I. Joes they all looked kind of the same, but my 3 all looked very unique. Because Snake Eyes is the ninja painted all in black. Stalker was the only African-American guy. He had a camo outfit. Now, Short Fuse, he was kind of the more generic trooper, and he would have looked like all of the figures my brother had. But he was the only one of those guys that I had who was just wearing plain drab green. So to me, he felt unique. So I had 3 pretty unique characters in my 1982 collection. Anyway, so because Stalker was one of my first G.I. Joes, I have kind of a connection to this guy. I was really pleased to get this new figure of him. I was a little disappointed with the paint job. I feel he looks a little too bland. I don't know if you can even see the camo pattern on him, but he's green on green. The vintage figure, it was a much starker contrast. His greens were a lot brighter, so you could see the dark green on the lighter green a lot better. Here it all just kind of blurs together. But I would bet my life that they're going to repaint this figure on a vintage card, similar to what they did with Gung-Ho, and he's going to be in the brighter colors, more like his classic 1982 figure. And I'll end up buying it again. Now, if that figure had come out first, and then this figure second, I probably would have passed on this figure. Because it's a great figure. I love the head sculpt. I love the removable beret, which the vintage figure didn't have, and all that stuff. But I don't think I would need this figure if I knew I was getting, a classic-looking Stalker. And I feel Hasbro probably knows that a lot of fans feel that way. So, of course, they put out this one first. Everybody buys it just because they want Stalker. And then a couple of months down the road, they're going to release the one that everybody would rather have in the classic colors. So, anyway, this guy is cool. But it does come with a little asterisk because I know there's going to be a better one coming. Probably before very long at all. So that's Stalker. Next I'll talk about Kamakura. I showed you his box earlier. So this is Snake Eyes' Ninja Apprentice. I really like this character. To some other fellas my age who have been with G.I. Joe since the beginning, they might not care for this guy, or they might not know who this guy is. That's because a lot of old school G.I. Joe fans kind of, they were with G.I. Joe from 1982 until they weren't. Some people got off in 1986 when things started getting a little weird with Serpentor. Some people made it all the way till 1990, which is about the time I jumped off. Some people made it all the way to the end of the toy line in 1994. But Kamakura was introduced when G.I. Joe was relaunched around 2002, and Devil's Due was the small comic book company that got the license to make new G.I. Joe comic books, and they continued the storyline from Marvel comic books in the 80s, and they added new characters into the mix, including Kamakura. So, cool character. I was a big fan of those Devil Do comic books. Those comic books have been disavowed because when IDW got the G.I. Joe comic book license, they also wanted to continue the storyline established by Marvel in the 80s, but they didn't want to deal with all the stuff that Devils Do had done. So they just kind of said, yeah, forget that ever happened. We're just going to pick up right where the Marvel comic books left off. Now, interestingly enough, this character was also introduced in the IDW comic books, except he never took the name Kamakura. He took the name Throwdown, and he was also kind of an apprentice of Snake Eyes. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. They went with the Devil's Due version of this guy, and he's cool. This guy had a few figures made of him in the early 2000s, and he got a couple figures made in the modern line from, like I said, 2007 to about 2018, 19 or so. So yeah, I've got a few Kamakura figures, and he comes from an era of G.I. Joe, which I think is very underappreciated, of those early 2000s. And we don't often see those characters revisited. So I was stoked to get a new Kamakura. He's got a masked and an unmasked head, both of which I like. I think I'm going to display him on my shelf unmasked, even though he kind of just looks like Archie with his red hair. But I feel with the kind of standard ninja mask, it just makes him look a little bit more generic. I kind of really like the option to have an unmasked head, which he never had before on any of his previous iterations. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. All right, man, I'm running long here, so I think there's just 3 more figures to show you. All right, so when I was a kid, I absolutely loved the Crimson Twins that were introduced in, again, I want to say 86, 85, maybe? 85 or 86. So it was Tomax and Xamot. And their names are just mirror images of each other. These guys were based on the kind of legend of the Corsican brothers. So they're brothers who can feel each other's pain and stuff. So if you punch one guy in the face, the other guy feels it and all that sort of stuff. The vintage toys, they look just like this. You can see they're pretty much identical, except like their sashes go the opposite way, and they each have one shoulder pad, but it's on the opposite shoulder. So they look like mirror images of each other. And, if you hold Tomax up to the mirror, he looked like Xamot, including his name would just flip. So Tomax becomes Xamot. So they were identical. Even their hairs are parted, the opposite way. The only difference was that Xamot has a scar running down his cheek. You probably can't see it here, but I'll do a close-up so you can really tell the difference. Anyway, I always loved these guys. I don't know what to say. They're weird looking. They look like they should be trapeze artists in a circus or something. But they were very cool. These guys were the public face of Cobra in the cartoons and comic books. So they were often shown in like 3-piece suits running a respectable corporation called Extensive Enterprises, where Cobra kind of filtered, or laundered their money through them, I guess. So yeah, these guys, public face of Cobra, acted like businessmen, but when they were on the battlefield, they dressed like weirdos, and they finished each other's sentences and all that stuff. Anyway, absolutely love these guys. I love that in the classified line, they didn't try to make these guys contemporary or cool or more realistic. They leaned right into the 80s and said, let's just make these guys, as they looked in the 80s. But it's weird seeing these characters with such detailed head sculpts and stuff, because my vintage figures, they looked very simple. I don't want to dismiss, because I loved those 80s figures, but when I think of Tomax and Xamot, they're almost like Lego people with their perfect hair parted to the side. When I look at these new figures, they actually have personality. Like, they look like they could be real living people, and it's almost a little jarring, but I like it. They look really great, and I love having these guys in my collection. I hope that they give us secondary versions of these guys in suits and ties. That would be great. And I'm almost certain they will, because they can just reuse. They have lots of suit and tie bodies from like their Marvel Legends line that they could just stick their heads on there. So yeah, really cool stuff. Okay, I think just one more figure to review. So we're going to talk about the Crimson Guard. So this is Cobra's Elite Trooper. These guys were introduced, again, I want to say 1985. And the Crimson Brothers, they were the leaders of the Crimson Guard. So I think they were all probably introduced in 85 together. Possibly the brothers came a year afterwards. But anyway, these guys are kind of the equivalent of like the Royal Guard in Star Wars. You know, you had these red regal guys that stood on either side of the Emperor. These guys were always kind of like standing next to Cobra Commander. These were the elite. I loved the design of the Crimson Guard. I loved the original 85 figure. They've made a bunch of versions of the Crimson Guard over the years, and they've all been great. They really leaned into the vintage figure for this guy here, and he looks fantastic. His accessories, his sculpt, you know, the colors on him, everything about it, it's just like, it's really great. And the Crimson Guard have a really interesting backstory. They all have plastic surgery, so they all look identical to one another underneath their masks, and that's so they can infiltrate society and replace one another. If something happens to one of them, they can just stick another Crimson Guard in his place. And yeah, just really cool. I dig it a lot. And they've already announced that they're going to re-release this guy with a slightly different paint job, so a silver faceplate instead of a black one, which, you know, there's a precedent for that. And I'm all for it, because this is the kind of trooper that I would be tempted to buy more than one, just so I could army build them. But I would rather there be slight differences between them. So if Hasbro is going to do me a favor and say, we're going to re-release this guy, except he's going to have a silver face, and he's going to have a gold symbol, or whatever else, do that, because then I don't have to buy this exact same figure over and over again. And it might seem silly, but in my mind, it's justification. These are different figures, so it's okay that I'm buying them multiple times. So anyway, I think that's it. This video is probably about an hour long now, which is, I try not to go over an hour if I can avoid it. I kind of dread all the insert shots I'm gonna have to shoot tomorrow. Hopefully this video turned out okay. Like I said, I'm not drunk, but I'm a little buzzy, and maybe when I'm watching this back tomorrow, I'll be like, why didn't I just do the flip around and do the inserts? Because it's going to be a lot of work to have to match up what I'm saying to the inserts and do the side-by-sides. And anyway, that's really neither here nor there. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Since this is probably the last, like these are probably the last G.I. Joe figures I'm going to get in 2022. I'm going to be working on my best of 2022 list very soon. That might not mean much to you, but to me, that's an exciting time. I love doing best of lists. I have a lot of fun doing that every year. And even though it's fun, it's also, you know, it's stressful almost. So many great figures. All these figures I showed you here today, I love all of them. Like, Hasbro hasn't put out a dud yet in the G.I. Joe classified line. Like, so when I try and think of my top 10 figures of 2022, like, sure, there's some Marvel Legends that wouldn't make the list, and there's some reaction figures that wouldn't make my list, but almost every single G.I. Joe I showed you here could be a contender for that list. Maybe some of the Vipers, because it's a mold I've gotten a few times, maybe not. But the Crimson Twins, Gung-Ho, Serpentor, Sergeant Slaughter, Kamakura, Outback, Stalker, they're all so great. I wouldn't be surprised if my best of the year list ends up being all G.I. Joes, because Hasbro is just killing it with these classified figures. I love them. That's all I have to say. I'm going to finish this drink. Maybe pour another one. Maybe I'll just go to bed. But anyway, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. And be sure to come back soon, because I'll probably have another video in about a week. So I'll see you then. Until then, ciao.